Toussaint and Advantage General is. Time is now 7 a.m. and it's now time for the Morning Watch. Listeners to Love 101 FM are advised that the views and opinions expressed in this program are not necessarily those of Love 101 FM. Welcome to the Morning Watch on Love 101 FM. I'm your host, Toussaint. A special welcome to our listeners on Love 101, love101.org, and if you're overseas and on the move. U.S. listeners can access us at 712-832-8001. And if you're in the UK, 0330-332-6541, or join us via the Love 101 FM app that can be downloaded from the Google Play Store or the Apple Store. You can also join us on Love 101 FM Facebook and YouTube Live. In the first watch today, let's discuss the suggestion that virgins and abstinence are on the rise. And in the second watch, the new poet laureate, Professor Kwame Dawes, preserving the legacy of Jamaican poetry. For our social media question, we ask, are virgins and abstinence on the rise in Jamaica? Give reasons for your answer, and please keep your responses PG. We're asking you to share those responses on our Love 101 FM Facebook page and YouTube channel, and also on WhatsApp 876-997-3125 using the hashtag The Morning Watch. We'll share your responses later on in the program, but before all of that, here's I Quote. All right, today's I Quote is from Franklin D. Roosevelt, and it says, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Yeah, good morning, Jokan. Good morning. Yeah, I think I am aware of that quote many years now. Okay. Yeah, the only thing to fear is fear itself. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and speaking about years, I was listening to one of the songs, Black Up. Mm. Oh, yeah, Black Up, Sister Faith. Yeah, what year was that? You don't have any idea? Year. I mean, no, I don't have the year right here, no. But I'm pretty sure it's some years, though. Yeah. Almost a year, though. It brought back some memories. Right. Yeah, man, great job. The first watch will be back after this break.
Will that be cash or card? Card. You have a supermarket card from Flow too?
Yes. It's just like Flow paying for my groceries.
Sign up for Yard and Road for only $6,300 plus GCT, and you too can get a $10,000 supermarket card. Get Yard and Road, the plan that pays you back. Conditions apply.
In Jamaica, your rights are protected by our Constitution. From the right to education to freedom of expression, every citizen deserves respect and dignity. But remember, with rights come responsibilities. Let's uplift and respect each other and stand against injustice. Together, we can make Jamaica a better place for ourselves and future generations. Know your rights. Embrace your responsibilities. This message was brought to you by the Ministry of Legal and Constitutional Affairs.
It's tax season. Time to reach for your checkbook. Pull out the cash. Or maybe not. Discover an easier way to pay your taxes. Use your Sagicor Bank Business Credit Card. You get a one-month payment holiday, up to 55 days interest-free, and unlimited reward points on every dollar you spend. Discover how easy and convenient it is to pay your taxes with your Sagicor Bank Business Credit Card. Don't have a Sagicor Bank Business Credit Card? Visit Sagicor.com to apply for yours today. Conditions apply.
Welcome back to the Morning Watch. Thanks for staying with us. I'm your host, Toussaint. Now, it is said that the number of virgins and persons practicing abstinence is on the rise. It is also said that there is significant increase in the percentage of young adults who have never had sexual intercourse compared to previous years. Well, to discuss this and related issues, we have online Reverend Michael Aiken, Associate Pastor of the Fellowship Tabernacle in Kingston and Director of the Gideon Educational Center, as well as Mrs. Jehan White, Clinical Psychologist of Tea House Therapy. Good morning to you both.
Good morning, my brother. Good morning indeed. Thanks for having me. Good morning to the other guests you have on the line.
Yeah, Mrs. White.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. Good to have you both with us again. Do you believe, both of you, that the number of virgins and cases of abstinence are indeed on the rise? And tell us why. Beginning with you, Mrs. White.
Well, I think that the numbers, I think the numbers have been increasing, but maybe for very different reasons. I think that people's view on sex and intimacy has been shifting with time. And due to that, people are stepping away from sexual intercourse.
Numbers are increasing, but for different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And you said that those reasons are?
Well, some of them could be related to the religious practices, for sure, in terms of abstinence. But there also are people who are stepping away from sexual intercourse due to celibacy. So they are stepping. So they originally started to be sexually intimate, but they've, with time, decided to stop.
Okay. And Reverend Aiken, what is your belief?
I would want to believe that the data you just referred to is correct.
Mm-hmm.
Because, of course, that would fit our own kingdom perspective as it pertains to remaining, of course, until you get married, remaining without having sex. However, my own experience as I counsel young males and females doesn't seem to support that data. Yes, perhaps in an older age cohort, perhaps 25 onward, as we begin to mature and understand that having sex with everybody may not be the greatest thing in the world. But I think the 15 to 24 age cohort that I read in preparation for your program, I don't think that's correct, at least not in rural Jamaica and not in inner city Jamaica. Both rural Jamaica and inner city Jamaica have similar development patterns as it pertains to family, community, and other demographics. And I would say too, my experience, and I must say to you and your listeners, I'm not looking at data, I'm speaking about anecdotal experience.
Mm-hmm.
My data shows that, or my experience shows that it's not just peer sex, but stepfather, step-boyfriend, and other engagements in that regard because of the closeness of our living conditions sometimes that are simply inappropriate. 7 people in the same apartment or home or hillside shack just doesn't work for sexual abstinence.
Let me get it clear now from you, Reverend Aiken. You are saying your opening statement, you would want to believe
that people are,
but your reality, you are saying that
reality doesn't show that.
Doesn't show that.
At least not for rural Jamaica and inner city Jamaica. And I think you perhaps would be aware that there are similarities between both, which is why whenever there is some type of government initiative that targets inner city Jamaica, and I'm asked to give advice or be a consultant, I would usually say find the rural area that best also fits that inner city area that you're trying to help.
All right.
Most of our cities are populated because of the movement of people from rural Jamaica seeking work in our city areas or metropolitan areas. So the the actions we take, of course, need to be duplicated in both areas, because I found that the patterns of a Denham town are similar to the patterns of a Charlestown in terms of community demographics and community social development.
Mrs.
I would really contest that particular data you have, and particularly for that age demographic. I mean, I can tell some stories that are shocking to me, and by no means a prude, even though, of course, I will still defend the person and work of Yeshua Messiah, and I would want us to follow his principles. I would want to follow the writing of the Apostle Paul and tell every young person, abstain, of course, until you get married. But, sorry to say, the data doesn't seem, the anecdotal data doesn't seem to fit that.
Mrs. White, you want to give a response to what was just said by Reverend Aiken?
Definitely. I think that Reverend Aiken absolutely has a point. The anecdotal data probably does not reflect that. The data I'm referring to regarding celibacy is definitely more in the middle class community. So I would have to refer to his expertise on that one.
And you had mentioned earlier, Mrs. White, that perhaps the religion has a role to play if we are to believe the theory or the research allegedly done. What about the church in particular? Any idea if the church had a particular role to play in that?
In terms of the increases in numbers, I believe the church would have some effect on those numbers, because it has been something that has been consistent within the messages, has always been to abstain and to engage in sexual activity when it comes to the ability within marriage and within the practices of a married union. So, however, when it comes to the data that has been seen in terms of the research that's done, and the research done is usually done within the middle class community. So that's always a struggle within the validity of the numbers that were given, because it doesn't reflect the inner city community. So Reverend Aiken's absolutely right on that one. So, but based on what we're seeing, the religious belief systems have again have supported and have reinforced that messaging for young people.
And outside of the influence and message of the church, what would create a situation for persons to be more willing to abstain or to be celibate, would you say, Mrs. White?
I would say that outside of the church, what would be supporting?
Yes, for them to be abstaining more, if that data is correct.
If that data is correct, then it would definitely be kind of the social conditioning and the psychological rationale for the self.
Social conditioning, psychological rationale. Drill down into that. What do you mean by that?
So social conditioning is related to this. As we're growing up and as we are raised in our homes, we are taught from our teachings and from our parents that it's really important to abstain from sex. And so as a result, we are socially, it's kind of learning theory. And so we learn that is the best way to follow the teachings. And we are also encouraged to continue to live that life. And so as a result, the young people are moving forward in that way.
Before you go, because I want to make sure that has always been the case. Why now in recent times that message is hammering home? Hold that thought, please. I gather that we're up on a break. We'll be right back.
See more on the board. Discover a new and convenient way to send money abroad with the GK1 app. Download GK1 from the Google Play Store or Apple App Store to send with Western Union today. The time by Grace Kennedy Remittance is 7:15. King of the Love, we've been here for 20. Guardian Light. Leading the way, protecting you and yours at every day. Guardian Light. Looking at the light, caring for them, caring for you. Looking at the light that's from great to for every generation, for every stage. Your partner for 25 years. Guardian Light. Are you looking for modern faucets to transform your home or commercial property? The Home of Faucets is your place to be. We are located at Shop 42 Leaf Mall, Caledonia Road, Mandeville, Manchester. We also provide free island-wide next-day delivery. Contact us on Instagram at Home of Faucets. By telephone at 876-492-4810 or homeoffaucets.com. Home of Faucets, contributing to modern satisfaction.
Welcome back to the Morning Watch. Thanks for staying with us. I'm your host, Dylan Toussaint. In this, the first watch, we are discussing the suggestion that virgins and abstinence are on the rise. And in so doing, we have online Mrs. Jehan White, who's a clinical psychologist of Tea House Therapy, and the Reverend Michael Aiken, Associate Pastor of Fellowship Tabernacle in Kingston, and Director of the Gideon Educational Center. Before the break, I believe, Mrs. White, you were, I was asking the question because you mentioned about social conditioning, perhaps being one of the reasons for its rise. And I was asking, why is it that it's resonating now, seemingly, and not back in the day?
In terms of the reasoning why it would be resonating now versus as opposed to then, because you're right, it's always been present. I can't speak to that directly within the church. I can speak from a psychological perspective. And so from a psychological perspective, I think one of the reasons it's probably resonating more now is because there has been more of an increase in the messaging around marriage. And so as marriage has been reinforced, and even in the greater society, then and from, again, I can only speak from the psychological perspective, that can probably be one of the reasons why it is falling as more as landing more with young people as opposed to before.
Okay. Reverend Aiken, in what ways is this view, and I'm calling it that for the time being, positive or negative? It's about the alleged increase in abstinence and virgins. In what way is this positive or negative?
Positive aspect of the data that you have, and that Lady White, of course, this thing is happening particularly in our, for want of a better phrase, our upper families. Mm-hmm. And by the way, just pause for a moment. I should say, and I do believe Lady White and you, Dr. D, know this. There are at least 2 Jamaicas. Mm-hmm. And whenever we're doing any kind of polling, we must be consistently and constantly aware of that. Okay? And we have to understand that whenever we decide to embrace pastoral work, political work, social advocacy, Jamaica is not one nation under God. It's about 2 or 3 nations under God. And we must be aware of that. But the positive part of that message is that the church then may be doing something right that has somehow gotten to the present generation in which that's reflecting. Mm-hmm. And what I want to do right away is find out what are we doing differently why the impact all of a sudden is gaining traction. Can we do it more? Because the Bible is clear about fleeing sex before marriage, and you're very aware that it talks about it being a different sin than sins that you can commit otherwise, and so on. And as a result, the church has been very strong in that area, even though you'd have some who would say, "Hey, that's too much. Just back off a little bit. Preach about good works and other things." But the church, if it's going to be the church, has to stand up for righteousness, whether that's and purity, whether that's in sexual areas or in other areas of society as it pertains to our governance and other things. Our voices have got to be loud and clear. But it would be important then to determine what's causing the impact all of a sudden, so we can amp that up and repeat that as much as we can. That's why, as we began, I said to you, boy, I'd be excited if that represents the truth. And of course, even if it represents the truth only in a small segment of our upper echelons, at least somebody is being sensible in their response. And by the way, sexual abstinence, just about religion enough. There are health issues when the Bible is not taught in that regard.
Right.
There are emotional and psychological issues that sometimes are not discussed. I don't know if you all saw the recent video that this young lady who now lives abroad pushed on Facebook regarding her uncle saying, "This man destroyed my life. He has made me unable to maintain proper relationships now that I want to marry and settle down." And she accused him of sexual impropriety from as early as age 3. So we are very aware sometimes of these kind of family and community interactions, and they actually sometimes or most times hurt the development of those who are the victims.
Right.
And it's not just about religion. It's not just about liking to preach about sexual abstinence and the honor of marriage, but it speaks to other issues of human development. I believe perhaps one of the greatest clinical conditions that's not addressed by church or even by professionals like Lady White is arrested development. That's a term that simply means that some trauma took place in your life, maybe when you're a teenager. So say at 13, Dr. D, you had some trauma that emotionally it arrested you. But you're now 45 in terms of your physical body, but with the mind and emotions of a 14-year-old. That doesn't work too well, either in church or in nation building.
Yeah.
When you have people who are retarded in that regard. Because if the retardation was physical and you could see it, then we would realize the massive impact it would have on our nation if half of our workforce is physically retarded. But we have persons engaging who are emotionally set back because of sexual impropriety and unable to engage as healthy adults.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Lady White will back me up on that.
For she does. For the record, though, the information that we are, working with is U.S. based, I gather, and not necessarily within a Jamaican context. But Mrs. White, what in your view are the in what ways is such a view positive or negative from your perspective?
I wouldn't say that it's positive or negative. I just think it is something to understand. Reverend Aiken is correct. A lot of times when it comes to, I can definitely back him up on that, when it comes to the reasons behind people's choices, very personal choices of choosing to abstain or to engage in celibacy, it isn't just religious based. It can be based upon past traumas. It can be based on personal development. It can be based on, choosing to step away from an arena in which it hasn't served them, or they recognize that they're not engaging in a healthy way. But I wouldn't want to put any particular judgment on whether it's good or bad. I would more say that it's something to be aware of and something to understand, so we can better support people that are making these choices.
And I'm happy you mentioned the word support, because it's one thing to have views or findings like these. How do we maintain it, as a nation, if that be the case, if it's relevant to us in Jamaica? What are some of the challenges you foresee from at least a clinical psychologist perspective going forward? Mrs. White?
When it comes to maintaining it, I would go on as far to say I would maintain someone's decision from a personal perspective. So if they make a choice, my role is to maintain their choices. And so I think as a nation and as a community, one of the ways we can support people is to not judge them and to listen to what they're going through, and to always add the option and the voice of giving them resources and people to speak with. But I think one of the things that always chokes many countries, Jamaica included, is that when we judge people for what they're doing right versus wrong.
Okay. Reverend Aiken, same question to you. Foreseeable challenges and maintaining this this figure.
Well, in any aspect of life that involves human choice, the only way to sustain that is to have self-control. And that's not just with sexual issues. Any choice, to make sure you are able to keep that going as long as possible, your self-control has to be amped up. So whether you love sex or you love stealing from the public purse, if you've decided to stop for whatever reason, whether religious or whether you've become more mature or whether you have had a wake-up moment, maintenance will only happen if you have learned self-control. And on that point, I think that's one aspect of life that religious persons like myself, pastors, politicians, practitioners like Dr. White don't speak that into people's lives enough. We don't help them understand that making a choice is a human endeavor, something that God placed in your DNA. And you simply need to understand how to manage that, how to control self, and not just go straight to finger pointing and want to destroy the person and hurt the person because their choice may not be the choice you would have made. And that's what we've got to emphasize, that whether I make the same choice as Lady White or not doesn't allow Dr. D, or doesn't give Dr. D a reason to destroy one of us because it may not be the choice that you would make. So once we make that a little bit clearer and don't just make the religious matter, well, God says in the Bible you must do it, although that is true, but help me understand how to follow along, how to exercise the self-control I need, become the person that I ought to be according to the potential God has placed in me.
Yeah. John White, you have the final word in half a minute. What do you say to our listening and viewing audience therefore in regards to our topic this morning?
What I would leave everyone with, and I want to thank everyone for allowing me to be on the show. I would say, it's important to just like Reverend Aiken said, not necessarily point fingers about if we don't agree with choices, but to encourage self-control and support where we can, and know that everyone's making the right choices and the best choices with what they have. And when they can do better, and when we know how to do better or to make changes, that we are able to support people to do so.
Well said. Thank you so very much for joining us, lady and gentlemen. Have a safe, productive day.
And you too, my brother. Back at you.
Thank you.
Listeners, the Morning Watch will return in just a moment.
Joined by Jam Bank is
7:30.
We've been here for 25 years and we are
Guardian Light.
leading the way, protecting you and yours until we stay.
Guardian Light.
The light, caring for family, for you, looking at the life is one way to
Every generation, for every stage. Your partner for 25 years. Guardian Light.
The February 5-50 sales event at Home Things is here. Take $5 off every $50 you spend. Save big on the brands you know to trust. From beautiful Spanish and Brazilian tiles to exquisite bathroom fixtures and faucets from Corona, Moen, and other top brands. Check out stylish doors, windows, paints, and home decor that inspire beauty and elegance. It's the February 5-50 sales event happening now. Oakwood Road and Hudson Spring Road.
The Gospel International presents Breaking Lives 2025, Saturday, March 1 at the Macon New Testament Church, 67 Manchester Avenue, Macon, Clarendon, featuring Reverend Gotti Gotti, Orville Sutherland, Sean G, Saga Madonna, Lindsay, Leaning Heritage, and many others. MC Nadine Bray from Love 101, DJ Cheney on the turntable. Admission only $2,000, pre-sold $3,000 at the gate. Children only $1,000. Tickets at Morris Fish and Jerk, Clarendon, Brown, Tate's Pharmacy, Main Street, Macon, Gibson's Petroleum, Manchester Avenue. Sponsored by Nick Wade, Gold Line Pharmacy, Resolve, Glory Cars, Morris Fish and Jerk, Archie Funeral Services, Driving Gold, the Justice Suit.
Go home for worship. Looking for a new church home, a place where you can grow and connect? Come to the Church of God, 7-day 58 Maxfield Avenue, Kingston 13. For faithful young challenges. Maxfield High always lead the way in faith and action. Join us this Saturday. For more information, call 876-855-1113 today.
Mama work hard, for real. She do the most to send me and my brother to school. So, the dream was always to go to university. Well, I fulfilled 2 dreams with 1 joint bank savings plan, you know. Further my education, and I make mama proud.
wishing you could. With your Gen Bank savings, you absolutely can. Gen Bank will help you find a way.
Welcome back to the Morning Watch. Thanks for staying with us. I'm your host, Dylan Toussaint. Let's now look at the newspapers to see what Jamaicans and others are saying and doing. In the Gleaner, Trump administration says it's cutting 90% of U.S. foreign aid contracts. Also in the Gleaner, Trinidad's Prime Minister to resign on March 16. In the Observer, green shirt, orange shirt, it doesn't matter. Police is targeting all criminals, says Chang. Also in the Observer, NWC bags 98.9 million in amnesty. In Loot News, DPP warns pre-trial publicity could compromise SSL case. And then finally, in the Loot News, cops switch gears smoothly from Operation Transport to baby delivery. Okay. Those are some of the major stories in our newspapers. Coming up next, we'll read some of the feedback from our social media question. Are virgins and abstinence on the rise in Jamaica? Give reasons for your answer. And please keep your responses PG. Leave a comment on our Facebook page and YouTube channel, Love 101 FM Jamaica, or WhatsApp 997-3125. We'll be right back.
In life, the more you have, the more you have to lose. The more
We have a wide variety of items in store just for you. Fill your prescriptions while you shop. And senior citizens enjoy 10% off. Shop household, cosmetics, toys, and many other departments. We also offer curbside pickup and delivery. Visit our website at fontanapharmacy.com. Fontana Pharmacy, where it's all good inside.
Welcome back to the Morning Watch. Thanks for staying with us. I'm your host, Dylan Toussaint. Let's now join Jokal for a look at how our Facebook, YouTube, and WhatsApp friends answered today's question. Are virgins and abstinence on the rise in Jamaica? Give reasons for your answer. Jokal, does Cherry have something to say?
All right, Cherry in Spanish Town says, if it is so, it's a good thing. Good thing to know that our young people are upholding the good value of loving yourself, valuing yourself, and being of good character, and also abstaining until marriage. It is a good thing.
Okay, that's it.
That's it.
Good. And remember now, it's the American context, not necessarily the Jamaican one. We need to do a study on that to determine the responses. As we now segue into the second watch, Jamaica's first poet laureate was also a novelist, editor, and poet who wrote under the pseudonym Tom Redcom. His birth name was Thomas McDermott. And now, 92 years later, Jamaica's newly appointed poet laureate is Professor Kwame Dawes. Born in Ghana, he credits Jamaica as the country, and I quote, that gave me a lot in terms of my development as an artist, as a thinker, as a writer, and as a human being, end of quote. Well, to tell us more about this, we have joining us no other person than Professor Kwame Dawes, who is a poet laureate 2025 to 2028. He's also a lecturer and professor at the Pacific University and Brown University in the US of A. Good morning to you, Professor Dawes, and congratulations on your recent achievement.
Good morning. It's good to be with you. How are you?
I am well, and I trust you are doing well.
I'm doing just fine. Thank you.
Great, great. Now, I need to begin at the very beginning, Professor Dawes. Who's Kwame Dawes?
Who is Kwame Dawes? Well, I know that these segments are very short, so I don't know. I don't know why you decide to ask me a question like that. I'm the son of Neville Dawes and Sophia Dawes. These are a Ghanaian woman and a Jamaican man, and I grew up in Jamaica. I came to Jamaica when I was about 9 years old. Went to JC, went to UA, and this is who I am: a writer, a teacher. I've done many things in my life, and currently now I'm the Poet Laureate of Jamaica.
All right, and you have said so many significant things, but I also highlight you say you went to JC.
Yes, man. A good school, if you ask me. Spent 7 years in that school.
That's a great. Yes. Why and how did you become a poet?
It's a very funny question. I think, I had published 3 books of poetry before I even decided to call myself a poet. I think I write poetry is really how I describe myself. It's only out of convenience that I say I'm a poet. And I say that because I really believe that the people who make poems are the people who are poets, right? And it's a way in which we communicate with the world, the way in which we found a language to communicate and understand ourselves, and the way to understand beauty. So I'm a poet because I write poetry, and I share poetry, and I think poetry is important. When did that happen? I would say when I could say definitively in my early 30s. The truth is, before that, I was a playwright, and people know me mostly in Jamaica as a playwright at UA, and started theater company, the Christian Graduate Theater Company. So that was very clear. I was writing plays and directing plays and so on. In the meantime, on the quiet, I was making poems. So yeah, that's the best way to answer it.
You say that you're a poet because you write poetry.
That's right.
Yeah. This might sound, but what really is poetry?
Poetry is a heightened form of language expressing complex and difficult things, but also expressing beautiful things. We have a phrase when people say you have lyrics in Jamaica, which is that we appreciate somebody who has a turn of phrase or who has a way to express something that you say. As Pope said, one of the great poets of Britain, who said that, poetry or verse or wit is that which is often thought of but never so well expressed, right? And very often there's a declaration or an observation of something in language that has been practiced and trained to be able to capture it effectively, so that when somebody's listening to it, they say, I know exactly what you mean. I just wouldn't say it that way, but this clarifies it for me. I think poetry is on that basic way, a way in which language operates, and language operates towards a sense of beauty. Then we can get into the details of different genres of poetry, different forms of poetry, and so on. And those have very specific rules. It's like any other craft, any other artistic craft. There are rules that surround it, there are traditions, and so on. So yeah.
Yes, and I actually had that in mind to ask you in terms of the different genres of poetry. I mean, how many are there? I mean, is a host of them? What's the situation?
There's a host of them, and I think if we just look at Jamaica alone, I mean, we have to think about how do societies engage in poetic expression. And for many of us, we come out of traditions in which the oral performance of poetry, the oral articulation of poetry, is where it came from and where it comes from. And that is in our songs. That is in our hymns, in our ways of folk songs, in the way that we express those things, in our elocution, in those speeches that are made, in sermons and so on, using language at a heightened form, rhyming, using language in that kind of beautiful way. So, and also just in everyday living, the way in which people cuss each other, and how one person's cussing can be very bland and uninteresting, and another person can be memorable. In a sense, they are practicing the use of language in a poetic way. So there's that. Of course, when we are at school, you get books, with poems in there, and they tell you this is what a poem is, this is what it's shaped like. And that's another kind of genre. It's a genre of poems that is written in a book. It's the poems that people like Dennis Scott or Erna Broadber, any not poets of Jamaican, Una Marson of the old tradition, Louis Bennett. But then we have styles of poetry like Linton Kwesi Johnson or Okwonoro.
Right.
So there are different ways in which we think of poetic genres, and you can't say Bob Marley is not a great poet, frankly.
Yes. And your genre, what would you say, you have veered more toward?
I think you'll see. I publish poetry in my poetry appears in books. I've published about 30 books of poetry. I've also written librettos. I've written musicals. I've written I'm a musician and so on and so forth. So I explore that.
Just we're up on a break. We'll be right back. Yeah? Mm-hmm.
Looking at the light, we've been here for 25 years. Are you right? Just getting started, leading the way every day, protecting you and yours at every day. Are you right? Caring for them, caring for you, looking at the light that's far away now. Every generation, for every stage, your partner for 25 years. Guardian Life. Ready to make your business export ready? Register for the MSME Business Roadshow on March 6th from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. at the St. Elizabeth Technical High School, Santa Cruz. Join the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce in collaboration with the Inter-American Development Bank to access MSME support, government incentives, and financing opportunities. Plus, win up to $400,000 in business cash grants. Register now for the MSME Business Roadshow at roadshow.mic.gov.jm. See you there.
Welcome back to the Morning Watch. Thanks for staying with us. I'm your host, Dylan Toussaint. We are having a discussion with the new poet laureate of Jamaica, Professor Kwame Dawes, as he seeks to preserve the legacy of Jamaican poetry. Before the break, I had interrupted your train of thought, Professor Dawes.
Yeah, you were asking me about what kind of poetry I write, and I was trying to explain and to say that my poetry comes out of the tradition of poetry that I've learned growing up, learned in school, the books that I read, but also the ways in which poetry has come to me, whether it's in music, whether it's in the Psalms, whether it's in folk lore, folk tales, and so on. And I try to incorporate that into my poetry. So my poetry will sit down beside the names of poets that we know, the Dons and the Walcotts and so on and so forth, very comfortably. But hopefully it has a very distinctive quality that reflects who I am and my life, my experiences, and my what I call beautiful. Yeah.
What do you have any favorite pieces that you have done?
No, if you think about this, I've written about 30 books of poetry. If I have a favorite, I'll be really, really in trouble because the others will be very, very jealous. I'm proud of a number of things that poetry has given to me. Poetry has given me the chance to write about the experiences of other people, the struggles of other people. Poetry has given me the chance to think about the history of our people, of Black people. Poetry has given me a chance to express deeper things about what I believe, my faith and my ideas of my faith. Poetry has given me a chance to write about the people I love. And so all of those things will appear somewhere in my poems. Yeah.
Yeah. Who really is a poet laureate, and how does an individual become one?
I think Jamaica has done something quite remarkable to identify an individual in the arts, a poet, and by government fiat and by the authority of the government, name them as the representative of poetry and the literary arts in the country. This is a position that is ratified by the government itself, and it's housed in the National Library of Jamaica. And it came about through a lot of work. I mean, remember, you mentioned Tom Redcombe at the beginning of the segment, and that was Tom Redcombe's tenure in office was almost 100 years ago. And there was a break, a long break, and it was revived in the last decade and a half to really reestablish the Poet Laureate. In those days, the Poet Laureate was for life. And in the last few years, we've had a Poet Laureate named by the government whose tenure would last for 3 years. And we've had Lorna Goodison, Mervyn Morris, Olive Sr., and I'm the fourth one. So this, in the modern era, in the post-independent era, this is a really beautiful thing that the Jamaican government has done. And what we do is we promote poetry, we celebrate poetry, we encourage poetry and the thinking and the learning that comes from poetry. And we recognize that the literary arts are a very important thing to our nation. Not all countries do that. And so it's a really important thing.
Yeah. Any criteria, any guidelines that have been laid out to become one?
Is them saying come call me, So I don't mean call me.
As far as you know, Professor, anything that they normally look for in particular?
With a Poet Laureate?
Yes.
Yeah, I would say that they want somebody who is a poet and who has an established reputation of being a poet, but also I think it's a service to the nation. It's a service to the country. So they want people who see themselves as serving the literary arts and serving poets and serving people who love poetry and sharing it with the world. So I do think it's a position of honor that is recognizing somebody's accomplishments, but it's also a request for them to serve in many capacities, to start programs, to run festivals, to run competitions, to encourage reading in multiple ways of poetry and so on. So I think that's what they're looking for. But like I said, I didn't pick myself, they picked me. So I can only extrapolate that.
Yeah. What does it mean for you to be Jamaica's Poet Laureate at present?
Every time I'm recognized in Jamaica for being Jamaican and for the work that I've done in Jamaica, it's a tremendous honor for me. I've had many awards all over the world, and it always means something very special to be recognized at home and recognized by people who've known you forever and see that your work is valuable to a whole nation. So for me, it's one of the great honors in my life. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're born in Ghana.
That's correct.
Right. How do you think that impacted your life so far as a poet to this point of now being Jamaica's Poet Laureate?
So I was born in Ghana. My mother is Ghanaian, and one doesn't pick one's life. I mean, one's life comes to one, and so on. But I've been blessed with this idea that I epitomize the connection, which is a really critical connection about what Jamaica is between Africa, West Africa, particularly Ghana and Jamaica. And in a sense, my middle passage or my journey across took place a lot longer, a lot later. But my ancestry goes back to places like Sturge Town to in Jamaica on my father's side. I have a long, tradition of African Jamaicans who have been really, really important figures in making the connection. In fact, my father was actually born in Nigeria because his father, at the turn of the last century, 1900 and so, moved to Nigeria to work, and that's where he had his children, and then he came back to Jamaica. So the connection between West Africa and Jamaica, initiated in many instances by Jamaicans, I'm a product of that. And having those living connections, I'm somebody who believes in Africa and its diaspora and the connections across that. And I've been fortunate to be blessed with those realities in my blood, in my life.
Yes. What are your main commendations or concerns re preserving the legacy of Jamaican poetry?
I think one of the biggest things that I think is to ensure that Jamaicans understand that they have a tradition of poetry that goes back a couple of 100 years, and to be aware of it and to own it and to welcome it and so on. I think that's very important, and there are ways in which we hope to do that. I also think that it's important for people to engage poetry not as something they're afraid of, but something that they welcome, something that they know is part of their life. And I think there's anxiety about poetry because of misconceptions about what poetry is. So my hope is to encourage that it's clarified somehow.
And in our schools, for example, I know that you have been involved in schools in many ways. Any concerns or commendations there in terms of poetry and the impact and the emphasis that is placed on it?
Yeah, my approach is to say that I want to show people that they live with an understanding of poetry already. It's already part of who they are, and that allows them to expand the range of poetry that they are interested in. So when students, which I encounter in Jamaica a lot, students say they don't like poetry, they're meaning a specific kind of poetry, or they don't understand poetry. But if you ask them, if you give them a DJ, a really good track, and ask them to explicate it, they can explicate it. And if you give that same thing to somebody who doesn't understand all the allusions and all the references from another culture, they wouldn't understand it. So they are demonstrating a facility and understanding of poetic practice. So one of the things I always did as a teacher in Jamaica at KC and so on, where I taught, was to bring in music and say, okay, let's talk about what poetic activity is taking place in this reggae song. And then we apply that to Wordsworth, or we apply that to Hopkins. And they understood much better right away what was happening, that they had in themselves the capacity and the skill to understand it. It's just that it wasn't relevant to them. So for me, this is a teaching moment. This is the practice of teaching. My approach is never to say there's a problem, but to say you have in you the capacity to do things and to understand things. And always, I believe in Jamaica, there is that capacity because I see it all around me. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I segue from the school to the church. Do you believe that as churches, we have embraced poetry as much as we could and should?
I think what happens in church is that when we read the Psalms, or we read Song of Solomon, or when we read even some of the history books and so on, we don't admit or recognize that we're talking about poetry. All of it, Ecclesiastic, that's poetry. The Proverbs, that's poetry. Hosea, Habakkuk, those are all stretches of incredible, beautiful poetry. And I think sometimes we approach it without recognizing that its poetic forms help us to understand them. And that's a teaching thing, that's what happens in when you're a teacher in church. If you can pull people to understand that, then you've achieved something beautiful. You think of the Song of Songs. I mean, God is never mentioned once in the Song of Songs, right? But it is built into the language of the Song of Songs, which is a stunning book. We don't recognize it as poetry. We say it's doctrine, but the truth is, this is the poetic language. Paul himself, when he's in referring to Roman society, he actually quotes the poets, right? Yes. And then explicates on the poets. So poetry is a part of who we are. It's part of biblical talk, biblical language, and it's just to recognize it and to get people to embrace it and to enjoy it and to recognize its power.
Yes, and therefore, as we wrap, what needs more to be done in preserving such a legacy in regards to Jamaican poetry?
I think the real task is to identify it, to elevate it in terms of people's interests. In schools, they should have every assembly or every devotion read a little short poem. And I think as you keep feeding people poetry, and this is not new, but as you keep feeding people poetry, I think they will grow to appreciate it more and learn a great deal more from it. It's unfortunate that we've sort of reduced the need for literature in the exam system. It used to be that everybody in fifth form would have to do literature, but now it's gone to third form where you have to stop, whatever the numbers are. So that's unfortunate. But my hope is that we will be able to recognize that we live in a society and in a world in which poetry exists. I mean, Jamaica, and how to live that, because poetry is an imaginative form, and imagination is the source of empathy. Empathy is based on imagination. And if we don't train people to empathize through their imagination, then they will brutalize other people. It's when you can say, I feel like you because I imagine how you're going to feel. And I think it's a pathology when we don't imagine in that kind of way. So I think poetry, literature does that to people. Yeah.
Great. We have to leave it there, Professor Dawes. Thank you so very much for joining us, and congrats again. And we look forward to your continued influence and impact on our society and the world at large through the medium of poetry.
All right. Thanks for having me. God bless.
Bless you too. Thank you, listeners, for being with us. For information or get copies of this program, call our production department at 876-968-9596-7. Of course, this has been the Morning Watch. Thanks to our producer, Kathy Gale, and our guests. Please join Mr. Stokely Marshall next week as he continues to look at the issues of the day. I am Darlene Toussaint, reminding or returning you to Love in the Morning.